The intervention would start. There would be a detox bed available, hopefully. And once that kid went into detox, the family would be raising the white flag. Hallelujah, the kid's getting help, he's doing great. You know, he's cured. It's actually the toughest point is getting through the detox is 3 to 5 days. The body gets flushed, you know, whether it be medication or just going through, you know, throwing a kid in a cab and let them go through the DTs on their own. I've heard them all. When he gets out, actually the brain is still sick and addicted to drugs. So physically he might be flushed out of the drugs. And I might have some medical professional tell me differently, that's not how the process works, but that's what we see. And we call it the Superman syndrome. So we went from a Band-Aid approach to a Superman syndrome because the detox is the Band-Aid. Gets out of the detox, he feels like Superman, put on a few pounds, he looks better than he's looked in could be years. And the family's excited, he got out of detox, I'm gonna do a couple AA and NA meetings, Mom and Dad. Oh, that's great, Junior, good luck. Well, still sick, still addicted to the drugs, mentally, okay? And he goes out and uses. As you'll hear from Todd Crow from the DEA, probably, is that the purity levels fluctuate from 50% to 90%, depending on how fast that dealer wants to get rid of the drugs on the street. So you have a kid that just went through a drug detox, his body's been flushed, and he might go out and use the purity 30% higher than what he was using before he went in, but he'll use the same dose because he wants to get really high because he wants it that bad. And that's where we saw the overdoses, post-detox overdoses. So we came up with a model that we posed to a treatment facility, the Center for Addictive Behaviors in Danvers, that we needed a stabilization unit. So they would do the detox, and then they would enter the stabilization unit. So at the end of the stabilization unit, they had 35 days of sobriety. And then we would recommend the aftercare recommendations, whether it be, I mean, the best care was long-term residential. If they weren't willing to do that, they had an excuse or they had a justifiable reason. I want to go back to college, I want to do this, I want to do that. Sobriety has to come first. The other things will fall into place as you go down the road in life. Long-term residential, if not, there's some great intensive outpatient programs out there. And then there's always the network groups, which, you know, they all work. There's no guaranteed path of success. Every individual is different, every circumstance is different, and every want and every addict is different. So it's very tough to put a label on what is the exact recipe for success. It all depends on the individual, it all depends on the timing. As you'll hear from any addict, when did you get hot, what finally got you sober? You know, what worked for you? I just got sick and tired, you know, I was just tired of doing it. I couldn't, you know, beating themselves up every day, like Tommy said. The minute they get up, you're just thinking about how they're going to beat the system. We had a lot of young kids going into treatment facilities with older addicts, and they were actually getting exposed to a veteran element that would have a 17-year-old kid learning more about how to beat the system, beat the probation officer, beat the parents, than actually how to beat the habit. And it was kind of, you know, ironic that they were in a treatment facility and it was backfiring. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it. As long as they're in treatment, they got to stay at it. The longer the better. Relapse is somewhat inevitable. So I'm going to turn it over back to Chief Murphy, but our information is in the pamphlets. We have treatment facilities. We service people every day. There's avenues down the court, Section 35, which is a civil commitment. We can put them in hospitals, into facilities, which the judge can order. It's called involuntary. Because they're going to manipulate you. They're going to say, I'll go tomorrow, I'll go tomorrow. Let me just get one more paycheck. I have to do a few things before I go in. Get them down the court if they're not going to go on their own. If you have any questions or answers, Mike and I, you know, North Reading Police Department, once again, is great. We have some great Chief Rule, a new chief in movement. That's another great thing we have going on in our community. We have young chiefs that are committed to the cause of saving lives, and that's what we do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Vince and Mike. Next to present national trends and the threat of prescription drug diversion is Drug Enforcement Administration DEA Special Agent Todd Crow. Special Agent Crow has been employed with the DEA since 1997. He's currently assigned to the New England Field Division Tactical Diversion Squad, which investigates the illegal sale and diversion of pharmaceuticals. Please welcome Special Agent Crow. 30 seconds.
Thank you, Chief, and thanks for having me tonight. My name is Todd Crow. I'm a special agent with the DEA, that's Federal Drug Enforcement. I've been with the DEA approximately 15 years, and prior to that, I was a detective in Pennsylvania for about 8 years. Since about 2005, since the early 2000s, DEA has become acutely aware of the prescription drug problem we face, namely here in New England, and we form specialized groups to handle that. They're called tactical diversion squads, and that's the group I've been in since 2005. That's okay. I'm up here. I'm up here. So as I was listening to the speakers tonight, a common theme hit me, and that is, we're not here to talk to you tonight about general drug problems. If you were unaware that drugs were in your community and they were a problem, you're either in denial or you're in sleep. What we're talking about here is a very specific, a very profound, and a very pervasive problem, and that is opioid painkillers. And what I mean by that is this. They're called opioids because they're derivative of the opium plant, the plant we're fighting the Taliban about in Afghanistan, and also comes from Burma and China. These are medicines that are derived from opium. They're called opioid painkillers. And that's what we're talking about here tonight. We're not talking about your marijuana problem. We're not talking about your cocaine problem. We're talking about your opioid painkillers, and that's what we're talking about here tonight. We're talking about prescription drugs that are otherwise legal with a prescription, but they're derived from the opium plant. These drugs are very powerful painkillers. As I go through my presentation, we'll talk about that. They're also central nervous system depressants. What they do is, generally drugs are classified in 3 classes. They're either stimulants, like cocaine or amphetamines, that increase your heart rate, that make you work faster, make you stay awake. The other class is downers, or opioids like this, that cause you to slow down. And the third class is psychedelics, which would be like your LSD and marijuana. So these drugs are dangerous medically because they act as central nervous system depressants. They slow down your heart rate and your breathing. But some trends overall. About 41% of juveniles who were surveyed in this study found that prescription medicines were much safer than illegal drugs. So they weren't shooting it, they weren't snorting it, they weren't injecting it between their toes, they're not putting it up their nose. They find that using a pill that's created by a chemical company and that you get from a person in a white lab coat that stands higher than you at a pharmacy, that's okay. 31% believe there's nothing wrong with using prescriptions once in a while. So these are perceptions from our young people. This is not made up. This part of the survey was done in Massachusetts. These are not people in California who maybe have different views for us. These are answers that your kids gave on a survey. In 2008, over 20 million people were current illicit drug users. That's all drugs. It's cocaine, heroin, crack, methamphetamine, marijuana. But in 2009, 7 million Americans, 12 and older, abused prescription drugs. That's a 13% increase over the previous year. So what we're seeing here in the mid-2000s are an increase in the use and abuse of pharmaceutical painkillers. The non-medical use of prescription drugs, which means you don't have a prescription for it and you're not using it for pain, ranks second only to marijuana use as the most prevalent category of drug use. So the kids are smoking marijuana, but a close second is the use of pills. What happened is there's been a 10-time increase in the past 20 years of opioid painkillers. In 2008, over 6 million Americans reported a non-medical use of pharmaceuticals within the past month. Here's the kicker here. That's more than all the hard drugs combined. So more people reported use of pharmaceuticals than cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and ecstasy combined. That's the danger here. That's the problem. Pills never used to be a problem. I didn't enroll with DEA to fight pills. You know, it was Miami Vice, kilos of cocaine coming, through the Caribbean on a cigar boat. That's why I got involved with DEA. But that's not the problem anymore. And I show you this because, you think about these hard drugs, these street drugs, these drugs that are sold in a shadow of some back alley somewhere, or they're hushed tones in a car. That's not the problem. The problem is your medicine cabinet. The problem is stuff that you have in your house every day. That's the problem. More people have reported abuse, and there's more emergency room visits by pharmaceutical abuse than hard drugs, than all the hard drugs combined. In 2008, emergency room visits for the non-medical use of pharmaceuticals surpassed those for heroin, cocaine, and all the hard drugs combined. Listen, statistics can be funny. You can say what you want about it. How I try to measure what we do is by harm. You can measure the problem different ways. You can measure how many pharmaceuticals are sold. You can measure how many metric tons of cocaine are seized. I think an appropriate way to measure the problem here is harm. And how do you measure harm? Either overdoses or ER visits. So what this slide's telling you here, and it ought to be a kick in your stomach, is that more people went to the ER for pharmaceuticals than did for all the hard drugs combined. In 2006, the first time this happened since this information was recorded, overdoses caused by pharmaceuticals exceeded motor vehicle fatalities in some states, including New Hampshire. This is the trend. How many times you drive by and you've seen a motor vehicle accident, reading it in the paper, or you saw in the news that it was a fatality? How many times has that happened? Maybe 4 or 5 times in my life thus far. Now think about that. There's 4 or 5 times in your life that you have witnessed or have exposure to a fatal car accident. There are more people who die from pharmaceutical abuse than you have had exposure to in car accidents. It's shocking. This is why I talk about measuring the problem. This is why we focus on this. This is why Chief Murphy and Woburn Probation and others like him have started this program. It's because the harm that's done to our society by lost wages, by parents who can't pay attention, by lost productivity, that matters. But what really matters, what we're talking about here, is bodies, body counts. Now, you see here the first one, over 1 million. Now, can you imagine the response we as a society would have if over 1 million bottlenose dolphins washed up dead in Cape Cod? Could you imagine the outrage? Congress would have hearings, we develop some new federal agency to look into it, there'd be all these studies, people would be picketing, but no one does it here because it's 1 million and it's diffused around the country. But imagine that, if 1 million bottlenose dolphins washed up, on the coast of America in 1 year, what would we do? Here are 1 million people going to the hospital every year, and what are we doing about it? Just something to think about. Here's where it all started. It started back in 2004 with OxyContin. OxyContin was designed by Purdue Pharma. It was approved by the FDA in 2004. And what OxyContin was this. Oxycodone is the drug. That's the opiate in the pill. And it was designed to be time-released. It was designed for cancer patients. It was designed as a easing drug for pain. So rather than having to take liquid morphine, you could take 280 milligram oxys a day, and it would time release the opiates throughout the day. So you wouldn't take it and wouldn't have the immediate hit. You would have it throughout the day. But what abusers found they could do is they could crush the pill, or they could suck off the coating, and they could defeat the time release mechanism, and therefore they would get the hit right away. So before, this pill used to be much smaller milligrams, but you'd have to take more of them. Well, that becomes bulky, and it's not as easy to do. But now you have a time release mechanism in here with a large milligram of oxycodone, and what abusers would do, as I said, they would defeat the time release mechanism and get the high immediately. The first shipments went out in March of 2004, and April 5th, they were reported overdoses of teenagers using it, just within 6 days. As I said, it's a control release. That's what it was designed, but the abusers learned how to defeat the mechanism. It's similar to heroin because they all come from the same plant. It's all coming from the poppy plant. Morphine, heroin, OxyContin all come from the same chemical. And as Detective Canarcio talked about, the addiction, crime, and overdoses that went with it. The control release mechanism, as I said, allowed for the longer release of it, but abusers knew how to defeat it. And it's a quick gateway then to heroin.